I just wanna be happy, happy tonight.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Priscilla. Welcome to my next location. I am a Seattle-based flight attendant working with a major US airline company, and in today's video I will be talking about the regional versus mainline debate. Okay, the first thing is that if you're planning on becoming a flight attendant, especially if you do want to become a flight attendant in the United States, this is something to consider, whether you want to work with a regional airline or a mainline airline. And I do plan on sharing some of the differences between the two, and then I would go ahead to share some examples of airlines that fall under which category, whether regional or mainline, and we would go ahead to talk about some of the pros and cons of both just to help you make your decision. 2024 is around the corner, and I know a lot of you are planning on becoming flight attendants or planning on applying in the year 2024. So I feel like with this information, you will to a large extent be prepared on what to expect, what to look out for in terms of making the decision on which airline to go to apply. That being said, I am no expert. I am simply here to share my opinion. I did a few research based on the conversations I've had with some people, and based on that, I am here to share this information with you. So if you want to get all the gist, if you want to get all the information, keep watching and let's get right into it. If you are considering becoming a flight attendant, you do have to consider whether you want to work with a regional airline or a mainline airline. This is important because it does have repercussions in the sense that depending on which route you go to, there might be some benefits and there might be some disadvantages as well. That's why it is important. Based on the information that I gathered, regional airlines fill up the gap that mainline airlines are not able to cover. So essentially, they provide coverage, services, airline transportation services to areas that mainline carriers cannot cover. So that being said, clearly the mainline airline covers major cities, major areas, whereas regional airlines in this case will cover the other gaps that they're not able to reach. So these differences that I'm going to share are public information. I would try and leave the link to the website in the screen below so you can check it out as well. The whole goal of this video is to allow you or to give you the information that you need to make an informed decision, because before I decided to become a flight attendant, I did not have this information. For me, what saved me or what helped me was because I wanted an airline company that serviced my home country. So I was looking at KLM, I was looking at Qatar, I was looking at Emirates, I was looking at Lufthansa. Then in the United States, I considered Delta because Delta was the only United States-based airline that had straight flight from the US to Accra. So that was the turning point for me when it came to choosing an airline company that I wanted to work with as a flight attendant. However, not everybody might have that as the reason. But as your favorite flight attendant here, I am always here to sort you out. So let's get into the differences between the regional airline and the mainline airline. Assuming that you become a flight attendant with a regional company, you mostly fly to regional airports. So essentially, you're more so domestic with regards to the United States. You're more so domestic. Your routes are stuck with domestic routes compared to a mainline flight attendant who does both domestic and international. So using my airline company as an example, we fly both domestic routes and international routes. So essentially, we do go to Europe, we do go to Asia, we do go to Africa. If you're watching me, an international individual, or you're living abroad, I'm referring to, when I say domestic, I'm referring to the United States, and when I say international, I am referring to Europe, Asia, Africa. The second difference between the two is that you do fly on or you do operate smaller aircraft with fewer passengers compared to a mainline airline flight attendant who would then be operating on a larger, typically larger aircraft and with more passengers. So that speaks to what the workload that you might potentially have. The third difference between the two is that with regional airlines or for a regional flight attendant, your flights are mostly very shorter flights. So chances of you working multiple flights a day, which we refer to in the industry as legs per day, is higher. So you working 4 flights a day consistently can become the norm or is typical with regional airlines compared to mainline airlines, which typically have longer routes. My typical domestic routes that I do with my airline typically involve Seattle to Orlando, Fort Lauderdale, Atlanta, New York, LA to New York, all that. So because we have longer flights in a day, chances of you working multiple legs a day are lesser. So if you're looking to fly the minimal per day, then you might be leaning more towards a mainline airline airline compared to a regional airline. Some people also like shorter flights in a day because they don't like to be on the aircraft for prolonged periods of time compared to mainline, where you might have a domestic flight that's like 6 hours long, or if you go international, you might have an international flight that's like 16 hours, 15 hours, 14 hours long. Some people don't like being on the aircraft for that long, so they might prefer the short flights, which is the 1 hour, 2 hour flights, so they can do multiple a day. So then that, if you prefer that, then you would be leaning more towards the regional airline route. All these things are very important because it can make or break your experience with the job. So the fourth difference between both airlines is the in-flight services. So the services that are provided on the aircraft, that's meal services, snacks, or whatever. Because the flights with regional airlines are shorter, there's going to be limited to no service at all, compared to mainline airlines, where because the flights are longer, there's going to be service like full-on 4-course whatever the courses are, service. So service on mainline airline flights are typically more, or are provided more compared to regional airlines. Not to say that we don't have flights that we don't provide service on, or we provide very minimal service, but those flights are rare compared to regional airlines, where that's consistently the norm. The fifth difference between the two, regional, there are no transoceanic flights. Transoceanic flights essentially are flights that's to Africa, to Asia, to the Middle East, to Europe. And when it comes to regional airlines, they do not go to those destinations. So if you're someone who's keen and find it necessary to go to those transoceanic destinations, just note that working with the regional airline will not allow you to do that. However, you might not be able to work flights there, but with the industry work, we all have access to other carriers, other airlines. So your airline company might not necessarily fly directly to that location. However, you can potentially fly using other carriers or other airlines to get to that destination. So just because you're with a regional airline does not mean that you cannot fly to Europe, but you can fly there on your own time. So the sixth difference, which is very heavy and which pulls a lot of weight for most people, is the pay. Comparing both regional flight attendant pay and mainline flight attendant pay, regional flight attendant pay is lower compared to mainline flight attendant pay, in the sense that mainline flight attendant pay typically tends to be higher and more competitive. So typically, if you're trying to earn more money for your time, working with mainline will be the route to go. The seventh difference between both type of airlines, in terms of the work and crew, with regional, it ranges between 1, 2, and 3, whereas with mainline, you have a crew of minimum of 3 up to 11 or more, dependent. So keep that in mind. If you want to be able to work by yourself potentially, or you don't like working with a lot of people, then going towards the regional airline route might be the way for you. So the next difference is the fact that they're typically longer duty days with more flights, fewer flight time, and you end up boarding and deplaning more often. So let's do this comparison, right? So essentially for mainline, for example, you would have longer flights, but because they're longer flights, you're not deplaning and boarding several times in the day. So there have been moments where one in a day, I might work just a Seattle to Orlando or Seattle to Miami. And then on the second day, for a 3-day rotation, I would do maybe Miami to Atlanta, Atlanta back to Miami, or something like that, right? So because there typically aren't more flights in a day for a mainline flight attendant, essentially you're working fewer flights in a day, so you're not boarding and deplaning several times in a day, compared to a regional flight attendant who typically would be working 4 legs per day, who would have to board the plane 4 times, deplane 4 times. Whereas for me, on a typical day, I might be working just 1 flight or 2 flights, so I'm boarding and deplaning twice essentially. So that's the difference between that. So you're doing a lot more of takeoff and landing compared to a mainline airline, where because you're working fewer flights, there's a limited amount of taking off and landing in a day. But that is not to say that with mainline airlines we don't have days that we work 4 legs per day, but those are not the norm for us essentially. With regards to regional airlines, seniority in the regional airline moves quicker compared to seniority in mainline. I think my airline is the only airline that does not put you straight on reserve once you're out of training. You hold a line immediately once you're out of training. I believe currently all the other airlines in the US right now typically puts you right onto reserve, and then you're on reserve until you get to the point where you can hold a line. So with regards to the ninth difference that I shared, if seniority moves faster, seniority is linked to being on reserve. So the more senior you are, the lesser the chance of you being on reserve, the higher the chance of you holding a line. So if seniority moves faster with regional airlines, then it means chances of you getting off of reserve is higher compared to mainline airline. And even with mainline airline, honestly, these things are not like clean cut, like direct or straight to the point, because even with my airline, the time it takes for you to get off of reserve is base specific. Our base in LA, for example, I have heard that it takes years, like 10 years, if not 11 years, before you're off of reserve. But then at other bases like New York or Boston, it takes about 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. So keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, overall, based on the information that I found in regards to regional, your seniority goes up pretty quickly. I'm just going to share a few examples of mainline airline and regional airlines, so it gives you an idea of what kind of airlines with regards to which airlines fall under these categories. So regional airlines, we have Endeavor Air, Delta Connections, Envoy Air, SkyWest Airlines, and then we have United Express. With the mainline airlines, some examples are American Airlines, we have Delta Airline, and then we have United Airlines, plus Alaska, and we have Southwest. So the big question that I believe you watching this video is currently asking yourself, so which is the best option, regional or mainline? Which one should you consider if you're planning on becoming a flight attendant? Both do have pros and cons, and the pros and cons can be identified in the differences. And the reason why I did not do a specific pros and cons video for this is because depending on what the differences are, what I might feel like it's a con might be a pro for somebody else. For example, like regional airline flight attendants will work more flights in a day, but flights are shorter compared to a mainline airline flight attendant who would work fewer flights in a day, but the flights are longer. For me, I prefer longer flights and lesser flights in a day compared to somebody who might actually prefer shorter flights but more flights in a day. So everybody is different. So that's why I did not necessarily talk about the disadvantages and advantages, but rather focus on the differences so that you would figure out what difference or what factors you prefer, pick and choose what you want, and see which category has the highest benefit for you. Ultimately, you would have to decide what's more important to you. I already gave the first example with regards to pay. I know people that still stay with regional airlines because of the fact that they're not providing like full service or whatever, like full details meal service on the aircraft, whereas somebody doesn't mind doing that because the pay for mainline is higher, so it balances out that way. So just essentially consider all the differences that I have shared in this video, and then based on that, figure out what's more important to you and make your decision accordingly. Ultimately, with regards to regional compared to mainline airlines typically fly around the world. So like my airline goes around the world. Like I said, we touch South America, we touch North America, we touch Europe, we touch Asia, we touch Africa. So we're touching every continent at this point. So it's one of those things where if you want to optimize your flying experience, then you might lean more towards working with the mainline airline or even an international airline. All right, so in my personal opinion, I know you're all wondering like, what would you do? Clearly, you all know the decision that I made. I am with a mainline airline. Personally, when I weighed the differences between the two, I wanted an airline company that had service to my country, and I'm from Ghana. The other thing was a higher pay. If I'm going to be on an aircraft flying anywhere, it should be worth my time. The other thing also is that with the airline company that I work for, and this actually reflects more on comparing the airline that I work with to other international airlines, not necessarily regional, in the sense that with my airline, I am not required to live at base. So I can live anywhere in the world. I can live in South America as long as I showed up to my base, which is Seattle, whenever it's time to work. That's what's important. I'm not required to live at my base. So that was very, very important to me as well. And that's why I chose to work with the airline company that I work with. So in conclusion, regardless of what my opinion is, regardless of what is being said out there, you own your own journey and your life is your own. So before you do decide to apply, please do your research, figure out what works for you. Don't be swayed based on the flashy things that people show. Actually do a thorough research and figure out what the benefits are with regional, what the benefits are with mainline, and make your decision based on that. Because you might work with an airline company that allows you to go to all these beautiful destinations, but you might not necessarily enjoy the job as a whole. And don't let the life that people show you on social media make that decision for you. Do your own research, find out data, and then make your decision based on that data. Okay, and thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye bye.